Hello, this is Yogeshwar 7000 again, and I'm back on my series on stories from the Puranas. And today we'll be talking about a very interesting story, and this story is about King Parikshit and his subsequent death. And this is in continuation to the story which mentioned how the Pandavas were born. And of course, Pandavas were born, and then they had their cousins, which were the Kauravas, and then they had a fight between the Kauravas and the Pandavas, which is mentioned in the great epic Mahabharata, and we're not going to get into that. And after the Mahabharata ended, Dhritarashtra, who was the elder brother to King Pandu, he lost all his sons. And of course, King Pandu was already dead, and he had 5 sons called the Pandavas. They were involved in the battle with Kauravas, and they stayed alive. However, in the battle, they lost all their sons themselves, except for one son called Parikshita. Actually, he was not the direct son of the Pandavas, but he was the son of Abhimanyu, who was the son of Arjuna. So Arjuna was one of the Pandavas, and all their sons, the Pandavas lost all their sons, not in the battle, but after the battle, where Ashwathama killed the Pandavas' sons. And we are not going to get into that story today, but Pandavas did lose their sons. They had already lost one of the other sons, which was Arjuna's son, whose name was Abhimanyu. However, Abhimanyu's wife was pregnant. Abhimanyu's wife was Uttara. She was pregnant with a child, and the child was Parikshita. So we'll be talking about the story of Parikshit today, who was the only descendant left from the Pandavas. And of course, Parikshit was also killed in the womb by Ashwathama, and the great Lord Krishna brought him back to life, but we'll not get into that story as well. We'll just tell you as to what happens when Parikshit started to rule the kingdom in Hastinapur. So this is how the story goes, that after the Pandavas ruled Hastinapur for many years, as a matter of fact 36 years to be precise, because when the Pandavas won the battle of Mahabharata with the Kauravas, Parikshit was just born, and the Pandavas ruled the kingdom. The 5 brothers ruled the kingdom for 36 years, and when Parikshit became 36 years of age, the Pandavas left for the Himalayas after installing Parikshit as the king. And then Parikshit ruled and governed his kingdom for the next 60 years. So he was 36 when he was crowned king by the Pandavas, or installed to the throne by the Pandavas, who left for their heavenly abode after going to the Himalayas. And then he ruled the kingdom for another 60 years. So here's one point to ponder, that he was 96 at that time, and he was still ruling. And at this age of 96, he went once on a hunting expedition and shot a deer. And then he started to search for the deer, and he felt very thirsty, hungry, quite tired, and he was quite fatigued, as a matter of fact. And he saw a muni, a sage, in meditation in the forest. And he asked that sage, "Where can I get water, O sage?" But the sage was in meditation, so he could not answer anything. And the thirsty king, the hungry king, Parikshit, who was influenced by Kali, because it was the Kali Yuga at that time. Kali Yuga, out of the 4 yugas, which are Krita Yuga, Treta Yuga, Sat Yuga, and the last Yuga, Kali Yuga had already started. And when Kali Yuga starts, then the human intelligence begins to go down. The sattva gunas begin to go down. So he was very angry when he saw that the Muni or the sage did not answer anything. And he looked around, he saw a dead serpent lying down. What he did was, he lifted that serpent or that snake from his bow and coiled it around the Munis, the Rishis, or the sage's neck. However, the sage was still motionless because he was in deep meditation, and the king returned home. So that was done by King Parikshit in a lot of anger. And like I said, he was under the influence of Kali, because it was Kali Yuga, where human intelligence begins to go down, and he was affected by that. And the king returned home, and then when the sage's son Shringi, he was also a great ascetic, a great rishi, a great muni. He was a devotee of Mahashakti, the goddess. When he heard of this, his friends told him about it, that somebody has put a dead serpent around your father's neck. And Shringi, hearing this, became extremely angry. And he took some water in his hands and cursed that whoever has coiled a dead snake around my father's neck, let him be bitten by the serpent Takshak. And Takshak was very important, very powerful. He's considered to be extremely powerful even today. Takshak is one of the Nagas of the Naga Lokas. He's one of the great serpents. He's one of the great snakes. So the sage Shringi, who was the son of the sage in whose neck King Parikshit had coiled a dead serpent out of anger because he didn't answer him, cursed that whoever has coiled a dead serpent around my father's neck, let him be bitten by the serpent Takshak within 1 week from this day. And that was a very powerful curse. And here we are, the Pandavas fighting the battle with the Kauravas, winning the kingdom for themselves, and then they have one descendant in the form of Parikshit, and he's being installed on the throne, and here is the kind of a curse which he gets. So that was very, very upsetting to the king when he heard that. When King Parikshit heard that curse, he was extremely upset. So he called a meeting of his ministers and said, well, there has to be a way out. Can we do something about it? Because I don't want to die, and I don't want to be bitten by the snake's Takshak, the serpent Takshak, and die. And like I said, he was already 96 at that time, and that day and age, people used to live for a long time. How long, we don't know, but definitely 96 was not considered a very old age at that time. So he wanted to live, and he asked his counselors, his advisors, his ministers as to what should be done. So in the meanwhile, while they were pondering over this problem, while the ministers were pondering over this problem, King Parikshit built a building of 7 floors in height and placed guards around it, and he started to live on the top floor of the building. And he wanted to calm down the sage Shringi, who had cursed him, and he sent a messenger to sage Shringi, who had cursed him, and requested him to let him be forgiven. But that did not happen. And the messenger came back and said, well, that has not happened. So the King Parikshit remained there on top of that building, the seventh floor of the building, and started to count the number of days the serpent Takshaka would be coming and biting him to death. And in the meantime, there was a Brahmin called Kashyapa who was very well versed in mantras. He heard of the curse of the king, and he had a powerful mantra by which he could remove any powerful poison and bring life back to the death of the person who has died of poison, any kind of poison. So he thought, okay, let me go and visit King Parikshit, and he will be amply rewarded once he brings back to life King Parikshit, who was supposed to be bitten by the snake Takshaka in 7 days. And then in the meanwhile, there's another story which we'll not get into, where the counselors of the king advised him to perform a fire ceremony where they could bring all the snakes and put them into the fire and destroy them, so that they could not, or any snake could not kill King Parikshit. And that fire ceremony, that's another story. We'll not get into that, because ultimately that did not help King Parikshit as well. But what happened is that this Brahmana called Kashyapa, and he is not to be confused with sage Kashyapa. This was a Brahmin, not the sage Kashyapa, the famous sage Kashyapa. Has no connection here. He was a Brahmin called Kashyapa. So he decided to go visit King Parikshit and tell him about the power of his mantra, and tell him that yes, he can revive him back to life even if he's bitten by the snake Takshak, and that way he'll be amply rewarded with land or gold or whatever. And when Takshak, the snake, came to know about that, he assumed the form of an aged Brahmin, an old Brahmin himself, and he met the Brahmin Kashyapa who was on the way to King Parikshit. And he asked him, where are you going in haste? And then the Brahmin Kashyapa replied and told him that I've heard that the serpent Takshak is gonna bite the king Parikshit, and I am going to King Parikshit so that I can cure him of the serpent's poison once he's bitten. So the serpent Takshaka, who was disguised in the form of an old Brahmin, he asked him, well, let me test you. He says, okay, let me tell you, I am the serpent Takshaka, and can you display to me as to whether your mantra has the power to revive a dead person who has died of poison or not? So what he did was he bit a tree, and as soon as Takshak bit a tree, it was reduced to ashes from the poison of Takshak. And then he asked the Brahmin Kashyapa to bring that tree back to life, to which the Brahmin used the power of his mantra and brought the dead tree back to life, and Takshaka was shocked. So he thought, well, even if I bite the king, he's not gonna die, because this Brahmin is going to help him and bring him back to life with the power of his mantras. So he says, why are you going to the king? What is the motivation to go and save the king? He says, it's money. So Takshaka, and we know that Nagas have a lot of wealth themselves, so he said, okay, I will give you all the gold, I will give you whatever wealth you desire, and so you take the wealth and go back. And the Brahmin then went into meditation. He saw that the days of the king were already numbered, so it would be wise to accept the wealth of Takshak and not go to the king, because as is, he could see in meditation the king's days were numbered. So he left, and this way Takshak went to Parikshit, and on the 7th day Takshak assumed the form of a small insect, and he entered inside a fruit. That fruit was brought to the king, and the king cut open that fruit. There was an insect there, And without going into a lot of details of how the insect assumed the form of the snake Takshak, in a nutshell, the insect, once he was there on the 7th floor, when the king cut open the fruit, he assumed the form of the great serpent Takshak, his real form, and he bit the king, and King Parikshit died, and that happened on the 7th day, the last hours of the 7th day. And this is how King Parikshit, who was the only descendant of the Pandavas, died through the hands or through the serpent Takshaka, and thus the curse of the Rishi or the Muni got fulfilled. And of course, King Parikshit had a son to ascend to the throne or to inherit the throne for him. But this is how King Parikshit, the great King Parikshit, died at the hands of the great snake Takshak because of the curse given to him by the sage. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, the story from the Puranas. This is coming directly from the Puranas, so I will request you to have firm faith and belief in it. And in the meanwhile, I will request you, or I will rather recommend you, to subscribe to my channel, check out my website, there is a link below, and I will see you with the continuation of stories from the Puranas in my next session very soon. Goodbye.